A few weeks ago, I preached about the Beatitudes, the beautiful attitudes that Jesus wants us to live by. Then 2 weeks ago, on Remembrance Sunday, Dave preached about the wise and foolish bridesmaids, some of whom were completely unprepared for the coming of the bridegroom, and so were left out in the cold when he arrived because they just weren't ready. So here we are today at the last Sunday before Advent, when we can begin to prepare to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And this is our wake-up call. Are we ready? Now, if you are like me, and you might be completely different, but you may never have felt less ready for Christmas in your life. We have been locked in again at exactly the time when we might have hit the shops. And my next slide, you'll see the thing that has mostly irritated me on previous Novembers. We have every year where I live the Six Nations Rugby Championship, and we have it this year, but there are no crowds. And it means that all of us who live around here, and Roger will be able to attest to this, are virtually imprisoned, because there are normally 85,000 people every Saturday milling around our streets. You can't walk, you can't ride, you can't drive. And do you know what I long for now? I long for those days of 85,000 people swirling around our streets, and my family coming to me for lunch before the match. Our lives and our perspectives have changed, so today's lessons become more important. Are we ready for something that may be very different from everything we've known before? And at this time, we don't even know for certain whether at Christmas we'll be able to see our families or visit other people. So this slide really shows you a year ago what it was like, and you can just imagine what it was like in the streets. We still couldn't go shopping, but it was for different reasons. But the next slide shows you what happened on the 11th of November this year. On Breakfast TV, on Armistice Day, they were visiting people's houses where people had already put up their Christmas decorations. And when people were asked why so early, they said it was because the decorations brought them joy. The very thought of Christmas made them smile with happiness. So are we ready to smile with happiness at what is to come? And the next slide is perhaps telling a different story, because the gospel stories we've heard over the last 3 weeks have been about getting ready and about being prepared, because Advent starts next Sunday and the countdown has begun. But if we think that is all that the gospel stories are about, then we're missing something very important. It's not for nothing that the church will be dressed in purple to indicate that this is the time when we should be thinking seriously about things. Traditionally, the 4 weeks of Advent were not about opening little doors in an Advent calendar and eating chocolate. They were, in fact, times of abstinence, of fasting, and considering what was always known as the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell, which you can see in the next slide. It came as quite a surprise to me in my early 20s when I first discovered that that was what we should really be thinking about in the run-up to Christmas. The churches I'd attended in my youth didn't have any vestments, so I didn't get to see the colours change or ask why that was happening. And then, in my early 20s, I went to a church where the vestments changed to purple and the Advent wreath had purple and pink candles, and a whole new world of questions and eventual understanding opened up. Really important that we don't discount the impact and value of colour and traditions on those who visit the church. especially children, because they can stimulate very important questions. In more recent times, churches have picked other themes for Advent, which are equally valid. But our readings in the last 3 weeks have led us to the more traditional approach. The stories we have heard were all about readiness, but they were also about judgment. Those who were not ready were quite definitely judged. And so the next slide shows the story for today. In today's Gospel, the story of the sheep and the goats, we had a very clear explanation of the rigorousness of the judgment, and interestingly, of who is actually sitting in judgment. Jesus is the Good Shepherd, but he is also the King and the Judge who speaks directly to God as his Father. The sheep and the goats were all muddled up together, and then the shepherd came and separated them, putting the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. The king said to those on his right hand, "You are blessed and honoured by my Father, and will inherit the kingdom of heaven. You have cared for the hungry and the homeless, visited those in prison, and cared for the stranger or refugee." And to those on his left-hand side, he said, "You're finished, done for, condemned to hell for all eternity. You failed to give food to me when I was hungry. You didn't give me water when I was thirsty. You ignored me when I was homeless or in prison." And they immediately pipe up with, "Well, when did those things happen to you? We didn't see you in need." And the king replied, "When you saw that happening to others, you were looking at me. Everything you did for them, you did for me." The goats in this story had made a decision that some people were just not worth bothering about. But then Jesus made his decision, and it was completely different to theirs. Next slide, please. The big question that seems to jump out of this for me is, how did those listening and questioning Jesus manage to deceive themselves to thinking that what they were doing or not doing was okay? And the next question, which is much more uncomfortable for us all, is, how do we manage to think that ignoring what is happening in the world to other people is also okay? How dare we eat or drink ourselves silly and like goats devour everything that there is, and then say to the hungry, "Keep off our nice green fields and out of our well-filled supermarkets. We have houses, clean water and sanitation, so we're okay." Yet there are many today who believe that others don't merit the same things. Now, I don't think for one moment that any of you listening to me now think that the goat type attitudes are right. We can all see and recognise injustice in the world, but what we do about it may be another matter. Jesus is assuring us with this story that the right ending will eventually come, but there is going to be a cost and there will be judgment. But what we also know is that there will be hope, that there is hope. The problem is that our world is full of compromises, and we're living constantly in a way where it's hard to see how to make things right. Every time we turn on the news, we hear of more people being out of work, more people dying, often alone, children going hungry in the school holidays, and food banks overwhelmed by the needs of their community. We hear of refugees so desperate to get away that they will attempt a terrifying journey across the channel in a rubber boat, which may well cost them their lives. We have reports of the elderly feeling isolated and frightened, and the sick not knowing whether they will get the treatment they need, and feeling fearful about what may happen to them. And then perhaps For the first time in 100 years, in the pandemic that followed the First World War, we are all experiencing a genuine threat to life. Which of us will go out and in a fleeting moment of unknowing close contact pick up the virus and die? But our histories tell us that there have been moments of hopeless fear in the past which have been overcome. My mother's little brother in the 1920s, at the age of 4, developed appendicitis, and my grandfather rowed him across the river to the hospital on the other side. But it turned into peritonitis, for which there was no treatment available, and so he died. But now antibiotics and immunization have removed the fears that were commonplace for everyone 100 years ago. But still there are people who struggle to access what is available. In my own lifetime, the fear of polio stalked my early years. That has been removed. The terrifying consequences of measles that blinded children that I knew, the certain knowledge of death from leukemia and various cancers, those have all gone. My own little brother, who is now 68, suffered from kidney failure when he was about 14. They removed one of his kidneys and told my parents that although kidney dialysis machines had been invented, they were still very rare, and so they were reserved for parents with young families. So if anything went wrong with my brother, he would have to die. That sort of lottery of care is unthinkable today in this country, and yet we know that there are still doctors having to make life and death decisions. My niece is married to a man who is a consultant anaesthetist, and in the spring this year was faced with the fact, in common with many other doctors, that there wasn't enough oxygen in his hospital for everyone to be on a ventilator. Judgments had to be made that we would not envy. We can't change all these things, but we must not stop trying, and we must not stop caring or hoping. As Christians, we have to defend those who can't speak up for themselves. It's our duty to speak up and to act. We must not be complacent goats eating up the world's resources and denying others a chance at life. We must not give up. In the next slide, we can see the forerunner of Advent. Advent begins, and today we will have my favourite and I think the best collect of the year to end our service, because today is also Stir Up Sunday. The collect begins, "Stir up, O Lord," and was often used as a reminder for the making of Christmas puddings and cakes. Let us pray today to be stirred and shaken this Advent, so that we can live in the way that Jesus wants us to live, not scared by what is happening, but up for the fight for a better world for everyone, not just the privileged few, knowing that what we do for the poor, the hungry, the disadvantaged, we are doing for the Good Shepherd, for Christ the King. And what we also know is that in the midst of all the trials and tribulations of this world, we have shining before us the promise of Christmas, heralded this year by a precious vaccine. It may be a Christmas like no other, but this year may be the year to really reflect on the true meaning of Christmas. Because hope, like a beacon, illuminates the path before us. And if we allow it, it will bring us with certainty to kneel before a baby in a crib in awe and wonder and proclaim him King of all the world.